فيشقى اللهم اجعلنا ممن يعمل بمحكمه ويؤمن بمتشابهه اللهم اجعلنا ممن يعمل بمحكمه ويؤمن بمتشابهه اللهم اجعله لنا في الدنيا قرينا وفي القبر مؤنسا وعلى الصراط نورا وفي الآخرة شفيعا ومن النار سترا وحجابا اللهم خلقنا بأخلاقه وأدبنا بأدبه واملأ قلوبنا وبيوتنا بنوره ورحمته وهداه. O Allah, we call upon you and we pray to you, we beseech you, we ask you by your names and attributes to bless us with the love of your book, the guidance of your book. O Allah, alleviate our difficulties by the blessings of the Qur'an and unite us by the blessings of the Qur'an and guide us by the blessings of the Qur'an. Make it a guide for us in our lives and make it a means for us to Jannah. Make it a comforter for us in our graves, an intercessor for us in the Akhirah, and make it a nur for us upon the Sirat. O Allah, make us of those who act upon its verses, live by its teachings, and make us of those who reflect on its verses. Make us of those who are of the people of the Qur'an, and make our character of the people of the Qur'an, and guide our children by way of the Qur'an. O Allah, we ask you to fill our hearts and our homes with its abundant mercy. Allahumma ameen. Allahumma ameen. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Amma ba'd, we have today, brothers and sisters, 3 surahs that I hope we can cover inshaAllah. They are increasingly smaller in size, but just as profound in meaning. The surahs, as we said before, in the end of the Qur'an, the 30th chapter, may be very short in terms of their size, but the more brief the wording, the deeper the meaning is and the more need for reflection. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made in the Qur'an a type of explanation for all types of people, all different types of people. You find that Allah has given tafsil and detail so that someone who needs detail will get it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given brief expression for those who have wisdom and knowledge to be able to benefit and find what suffices them in the Qur'an. The Qur'an addresses all different types of demographics in this regard. The 3 surahs that we're going to discuss are very, very important. They have a very important context in the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, especially the first 2. And they also have very profound spiritual meanings relating to growth, relating to trials, relating to experience of ni'mah and blessings. And the 3 surahs again are Surat ad-Duha. Surat ad-Duha has a very important historical significance in the seerah as being one of the surahs that came after a pause in revelation. And what does that mean, a pause in revelation? We'll discuss inshaAllah. Surat ad-Duha and then Surat ash-Sharh. Also being a surah that directly gives the Prophet ﷺ insight into how to contextualize trials, how to contextualize the trials that he goes through in life. So Surat ad-Duha, Surat ash-Sharh is the surah that gives us understanding of bala. Where does bala fit in the spectrum? Trials, where do they fit in the spectrum of things that I experience in my life on a grand scale? Surat ad-Duha teaches us that if you go through difficult things, that does not necessarily mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has abandoned you. And difficulties are supposed to change you in a way, in a manner that fits with the lessons that it teaches. We're gonna discuss. There's a muqabala that's done between 3 verses in Surat ad-Duha. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, He says, أَلَمْ يَجِدْكَ يَتِيمًا فَآوَى. And on the other hand, فَأَمَّا الْيَتِيمَ فَلَا تَقْهَرْ. And then He says, on the other, and the muqabala is when you compare one thing to another. So we're going to discuss this relationship. The next one He says, أَلَمْ يَجِدْكَ وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًّا فَهَدَى. Its response comes into وَأَمَّا السَّائِلَ فَلَا تَنْهَرْ. And the third one is وَوَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَى. And its response is in the last verse, وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ. So trials are supposed to change your amal. Trials, in the second surah, trials don't mean that Allah has abandoned you. Allah loves you. In fact, in the grand spectrum of things, you'll find that yusr and ease always outdoes usr and difficulty. And in the last surah, which is Surat At-Teen, that we're going to go over, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls us to reflect on husn taqweem al-insan, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the magnificence of Allah's creation in the human being. Inshallah, we'll get to the 3 surahs as best as we can. Starting with Surat ad-Duha. As many of the surahs in the last chapter, they start off with oaths. They start off with oaths, wad-duha. Allah takes an oath by the early hours of the day. And then the night when it settles in. وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى. This is not the first time this is coming in. Right? وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى. Right? So, this surah starts off with a qasam. And then comes an oath. And then comes a response to this qasam. مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَلَى. It means Allah hasn't abandoned you and Allah hasn't despised you. مَا قَلَاكَ. Allah did not despise you. That's what qala means. And مَا وَدَّعَكَ, He didn't abandon you. Right? So here they say al-qasam. Why does Allah start off with an oath in this surah and then follow that with saying Allah hasn't abandoned you? This is تأكيد الرد على زعم المشركين أن الوحي حين انقطع عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم حين رأوه لم يقم الليل بالقرآن بضع ليال فالتأكيد منصب على إبطال دعوى المشركين أن الله تركه. Allah is telling us, what is that saying? These are from the words of Shaykh Muhammad al-Tahir bin Ashur. He's saying that this surah came after a pause in revelation. It was a short pause. There were a few pauses in revelation. One of them happened in the beginning of wahi, and the scholars differ how long this lasted. That one was a longer pause. That pause, some of them say lasted 8 months. Some of them say lasted 12 months. And some of them said it lasted shorter than this. It lasted shorter than this. He says here, والظاهر أن هذه السورة نزلت عقب فترة ثانية فتر فيها الوحي بعد الفترة التي نزلت إثرها سورة المدثر. So it says that first pause was in the beginning of revelation. The Prophet received the beginning of Surat Al-Alaq, and then some of them say Surat Al-Muzammil came down, and then after that there was a pause that lasted for Allahu Alam how long. But then after that comes Surat Al-Muddathir. Qum fa'anzir. Stand and convey the message. That's the first pause in revelation. Why was there a pause in revelation? Why was there a pause in revelation? Pause meaning the Prophet ﷺ did not receive any updates from Jibreel alayhi salam. The reason for this pause is لِتَشْوِيقِ النَّبِي صلى الله عليه وسلم إلى الوحي. When the Prophet ﷺ first received wahi, he was terrified. He was scared. He ran back to his home and he was saying to his wife Khadija, زَمِّلُونِ زَمِّلُونِ دَثِّرُونِ دَثِّرُونِ. Cover me up. And he thought something bad happened to him. He didn't know what he was experiencing. And this is by design. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted it to be known that nubuwwah is by istifa. Allah chose the Prophet. It wasn't that the Prophet ﷺ earned this by doing a lot of ibadah. No. We don't believe that about prophethood. They say this very clearly. وَلَمْ تَكُنْ نُبُوَّةٌ مُكْتَسَبَةٌ لَا وَلَوْ رَقِيفِ الْخَيْرِ أَعْلَى عَقَبَةٌ بَلْ مَحْضُ فَضْلِ اللَّهِ. This is in fact the full fadl of Allah. لِمَنْ يُرِيدُ جَلَّ وَاهِبُ الْمِنَنِ. So he says that prophethood is not earned. It is something that's given. Even if the person was to become very devout in ibadah, he doesn't become a prophet. That's not how prophethood happens. That's why the Prophet, this is actually a sign that it was a transition in the Prophet's life. It wasn't by his doing. It was by Allah's doing. It wasn't by his ilm. It wasn't by his ibadah. Allah wanted it to know that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a Rasul. He's a messenger. He's a carrier of something from Allah. Not something that he was able to do on his own. So that's why prophethood happened like this. It was a very scary process. After that, there was a pause. And after this pause, the Prophet ﷺ wanted wahi. He wanted it so badly. And then it came once again. And after some time, there was a second pause. That's when we have Surat ad-Duha coming after that. Before, during the second pause, they would mock the Prophet ﷺ. They would say, لَعَلَّ شَيْطَانَكَ قَدْ تَرَكَكَ يَا مُحَمَّدٍ. This is one of the women of Quraysh. She came to the Prophet ﷺ and she said, يا محمد ما أرى شيطانك إلا قد تركك. فأنزل الله عز وجل والضحى والليل إذا سجى ما ودعك ربك وما قلى. Perhaps your devil has abandoned you, O Muhammad. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responded back to them, no, Allah hasn't abandoned the Prophet. This is something that Allah wanted by design to be part of the Prophet ﷺ's life. The Prophet loved it when revelation. Imagine the experience. It's a supernatural experience. The Prophet connecting with Jibreel alayhi salam and receiving new revelation. So this is the second pause. There's a third situation in the seerah where the Prophet ﷺ didn't receive an immediate response, and it was similar to these two. Does anyone know what it is? Oh, mashallah. There you go. Surat al-Kahf. Surat al-Kahf. Surat al-Kahf. But that was for another reason. That was because the Prophet ﷺ was asked questions. These questions were by Quraysh. They got these questions from the Ruhban. They got it from the scholars, from the Jews. So they said, ask him about these three things. One of them was about al-Ruh. One of them was about al-Fitya. And the third one is about Rajul Tawaf bil-Mashriq wal-Maghrib. Dhul Qarnayn. They said, ask him about these three. If he's able to answer them, then he's a prophet. If he's not, then khalas, he's not a prophet. Right? They asked him these questions, and he said, I'm going to inform you of the response tomorrow, and he didn't say, Insha'Allah. So that's why there was this pause. It was a little different than the other two. This was to teach him a lesson. This was, وَلَا تَقُولَنَّ لِشَيْءٍ إِنِّي فَاعِلٌ ذَلِكَ غَدًا إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ. This is, don't say I'm going to do anything tomorrow, unless you say, Insha'Allah. Unless you say, Insha'Allah. So these are the situations. Surah al-Duha actually came at a very tough time for the Prophet ﷺ. As we said, the ridicule that was coming from Quraysh and the mockery was very tough on him. Prophet ﷺ had to endure a lot. And then he says to him after this, مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَلَى وَلَلْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى. He's giving him clear lessons that your ajr and your greatness and everything that awaits you in your akhirah is way beyond anything that awaits you in your dunya. These are critical life lessons for anyone who deals with trial. You know, so that was the Prophet ﷺ's experience. What's our experience with the surah? We don't have that experience that the Prophet ﷺ had. What do we have? We have trials and lessons from those trials. When Allah tests you, does that mean He despises you? No, it does not. Nah, but this is human tendency to think that. We went over 2 ayat from Surah Al-Fajr that tell us about this. You guys remember which 2 ayat they were? In the middle of the surah. Human beings tend to see their condition in life based on what they have. What are they? What are the 2 ayat? Exactly. فَأَمَّا الْإِنسَانُ إِذَا مَبْتَلَاهُ رَبُّهُ فَأَكْرَمَهُ وَنَعَّمَهُ فَيَقُولُ رَبِّي أَكْرَمَنِ وَأَمَّا إِذَا مَبْتَلَاهُ فَقَدَرَ عَلَيْهِ رِزْقَهُ فَيَقُولُ رَبِّي أَهَانَنِ. Human beings, when Allah gives them, they say, Allah has honored me. When Allah denies them, they say, what is that? Allah has humiliated me. So Allah is teaching us through the experience of the Prophet ﷺ, don't ever think that just because bala'id dunya and the trials of the dunya increased upon you, this never means that Allah hates you as a servant. لا لا لا. الأنبياء أشد بلاء ثم الذين يلونهم ثم الأمثل فالأمثل ثم الذين يلونهم ثم الذين يلونهم. So the prophets are greatest in trials, then those after that. فإن كان في دينه صلابة زيد له في البلاء. If there is a firmness in deen, there will be more trials the person has to deal with. So the next ayah gives perspective that one of the things that helps you deal with trials, one, know that Allah doesn't despise you. Two, is that no matter what you're going to get in your dunya, it'll never be like what is waiting for you in the akhirah. Once this realization settles in, that the dunya is not the end, it's not even something that's significant and worthy of mention in relation to the akhirah, then I'll be able to deal with the bala at a much easier level. So he says, وَلَلْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى. Then what does Allah tell His Prophet after this? He says, وَلَسَوْفَ يُعْطِيكَ رَبُّكَ فَتَرْضَى. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to give you, and He's going to give you over an extended period of time, and He's going to give you until the extent that you attain rida. He's going to give you until the extent that you attain rida. Now, where do we get extended period of time from? From sawfa, wala sawfa. You know, in Arabic language, there's many ways to emphasize your speech, right? And these these forms of emphasis give additional meaning, right? So, one of the means to emphasize meanings in Arabic language is by, instead of using seen for the future, I'm going to use sawfa. Seen, the seen in Arabic language, يدل على المستقبل القريب, is the near future, right? سيعطيك, just to say يعطيك means He will give you. سيعطيك, يعطيك is He is giving you. سيعطيك is He will give you soon. وَلَسَوْفَ يُعْطِيكَ, this is to the far extended future. Right? This is not just referring to something short term. This is a long-term allowance. وَلَسَوْفَ يُعْطِيكَ رَبُّكَ. Allah, your Rabb, will give you. And it's interesting that the word Rabb is used. Again, when we said before, when the word Rabb is used in the Qur'an, it describes that intimate relationship between al-Khaliq wal-Makhluq. Al-Rabb, He's the one who, this is referring to His actions with His servants. This is when I say Rabbi, this is the one who tends to my needs, stage after stage. This is the one who betters me through every experience in life. This is the one who is with me when I'm young and when I'm older, and in my last moments in this dunya. وَلَسَوْفَ يُعْطِيكَ رَبُّكَ. Allah, your Rabb, the one who was with you when you were an orphan, the one who was with you when you were given wahi, the one who was with you when you were being ridiculed by the people of Mecca, the one who was with you when you went to Ta'if, the one who was with you when you went on the hijrah, the one who was with you to the very end days in Medina. All of this, وَلَسَوْفَ يُعْطِيكَ رَبُّكَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala لَا يَغِيبُ عَنِ الْخَلْقِ لَحْظَةً. Allah's awareness never escapes, or His awareness never escapes reality, not even for a moment. That's something that we take from Rabbuk. وَلَسَوْفَ يُعْطِيكَ رَبُّكَ. Not only that, He's just not just going to give you. He's going to give you, and you're going to feel a full sense of rida. Rida with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you. Rida, contentment, is something that we're going to talk about today, especially between this surah and the third surah. The Prophet ﷺ tells us what rida is all about. Rida, maqam al-rida, the station of contentment, is one of the highest stations of ibadah. One of the highest stations of ibadah. And it starts from within. The Prophet ﷺ, he teaches us that rida relates to rida al-qalb, and that rida is the true spiritual richness. ليس الغنى عن كثرة العرض إنما الغنى غنى النفس. When the soul is rich, it is radiyah. It is content with Allah's decree. That's true richness, not the richness of the body, not the richness of the material wealth. What does it say? ليس الغنى عن كثرة العرض. Wealth, true wealth, is not having a lot of possessions. That's what the Prophet ﷺ says. True wealth is the wealth of the soul. So anyway, going back to Surat ad-Duha, we learn something important here. When Allah tells His Prophet these things, He says, أَلَمْ يَجِدْكَ يَتِيمًا فَآوَى. The Prophet ﷺ is reminded of his past and how sensitive a situation he had to grow through. Right? What does it say? He says, أَلَمْ يَجِدْكَ يَتِيمًا فَآوَى. He found you as an orphan and He gave you shelter. وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًّا فَهَدَى. And He found you ضال. ضال, what does ضال mean? ضال means misguided. What does that mean for the Prophet ﷺ? We're going to talk about that. Right? Was the Prophet misguided? No, of course not. So, another meaning of ضلال is عدم الاهتداء إلى الطريق. Not having a sense of misdirection. Not knowing how the way forward will be. Not knowing which path to follow. That's also a sense of ضلال. So there's a ضلال of misguidance, there's the darkness of the heart. And there's a ضلال for someone who is confused and doesn't know what to do. That's a form of ضلال. So of course when we're talking about our beloved Prophet ﷺ, there are certain things that are clear in this regard. He goes on to say, Shaykh Muhammad al-Tahir bin Ashur, he says, عدم الاهتداء إلى الطريق الموصل للمكان المقصود سواء سلك السائر طريقا آخر يبلغ إلى غير المقصود أم وقف حائرا لا يعرف أي طريق يسلك. وهو المقصود هنا لأن المعنى أنك كنت في حيرة من حال أهل الشرك من قومك فأراكه الله غير محمود وكرهه إليك ولا تدري ماذا تتبع من الحق فإن الله لما أنشأ رسوله على ما أراد من إعداده لتلقي الرسالة ألهمه أن ما عليه قومه من الشرك خطأ. What is he saying all here? What is this all saying here? The Prophet ﷺ was inspired. Did the Prophet worship idols? Yes or no? Before prophethood, did he ever worship idols? Okay. So, did the Prophet earn prophethood? We already answered this one. What's the answer to this? No. He didn't earn it. It wasn't from his actions. There's no set of actions that will lead you to prophethood. That's it. That's not what it is. Okay. He didn't earn prophethood. He didn't worship idols though. We know that because Allah prepared His Prophet before prophethood. In fact, they discuss this. Our belief in prophets. Our belief in prophets. They mention in the seerah that the Prophet ﷺ, what did he do? What did he do before prophethood for a living? How did he get a living? You know? What is it? Shepherd. And then he also worked with his wife later on, Khadija. He worked in tijara, and he was a merchant as well. But before that, he was also a shepherd. As the hadith mentions, that the Prophet, مَا بَعَثَ اللَّهُ نَبِيًّا إِلَّا رَعَى الْغَنَمِ. مَا بَعَثَ اللَّهُ نَبِيًّا is a hadith, it's authentic hadith. مَا بَعَثَ اللَّهُ نَبِيًّا إِلَّا رَعَى الْغَنَمِ. So they asked the Prophet ﷺ, وأنت يا رسول الله? He said, نعم, كنت أرعاها على قراريط من قريش. Prophet ﷺ said, even I would be a shepherd for exchange for some money I would earn from Quraysh. So one time, he was with the flock and the sheep, and they told him, why don't you go to some party that the mushrikeen are holding? So then what happened? The Prophet ﷺ considered, and again this was all before prophethood, considered going to witness what they are doing. But Allah Azza wa Jal willed that the Prophet ﷺ sleep and miss the event entirely. Allah protected His Prophet before prophethood and after prophethood. This is our belief. Does a Prophet do kaba'ir? Before prophethood, they say no. After prophethood, absolutely not. What about sagha'ir? Most scholars, they say that even sagha'ir, minor sins, for prophets are questionable. That they don't do this. Some of them said they do minor sins. The other ones, they said no, even minor sins, they don't do it. What about all of those situations that we know about Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam and about the other situations that are mentioned in the Qur'an? They interpret these. They say, وَعَصَى آدَمُ رَبَّهُ فَغَوَى ثُمَّ اجْتَبَاهُ رَبُّهُ فَتَابَ عَلَيْهِ وَهَدَى. This is before prophethood. They say that even minor sins, they don't commit it. The other ones, some of them they say, no, they commit minor sins, but they don't do sagha'ir al-khissa. They don't do minor sins that undermine them and take away from their maqam, like stealing something that's petty, or doing something that's petty. So you guys are clear on this? So we have two wijhas, two directions among the scholars about prophets and sins, right? As for before prophethood and after prophethood, do they do major sins? Absolutely not. Everyone agrees about this. Before prophethood and after prophethood, because Allah prepares His prophets. What about minor sins after prophethood? Is this possible? Some scholars, they give detail here. If it is from sagha'irul khissa, from the minor sins that show that this person's petty, this person's of a lowly character, insan khasis, this they absolutely do not do. Everyone agrees about this. As for the other types of minor sins, there's a difference of opinion. There's an opinion of a majority that say they absolutely do not do that. And what they do wrong is from hasanat al-abrar, sayyat al-muqarrabin, it's khilaf al-awla, it's contrary to what is preferred, or that their sins were before prophethood, not after prophethood. And the minority say no, they could commit minor sins. Are you guys clear on this difference of opinion now? You're clear on it? Everyone clear on it? Okay. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says about His Prophet, وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًّا فَهَدَى. How should I understand this? He says very clearly, this is not the dalal that you know. That the misguidance that we say about like someone who's doing ma'siyah and so on and so forth. وَلَيْسَ الْمُرَادُ بِالضَّلَالِ هُنَا اتِّبَاعُ الْبَاطِلِ وليس المراد بالضلال هنا اتباع الباطل فإن الأنبياء معصومون من الإشراك قبل النبوة باتفاق علمائنا وإنما اختلفوا في عصمتهم من نوع الذنوب الفواحش التي لا تختلف الشرائع في كونها فواحش وبقطع النظر عن التنافي بين اعتبار الفعل فاحشة وبين الخلو عن وجود شريعة قبل النبوة فإن المحققين من أصحابنا نزهوهم عن ذلك. That's the bottom line. He says, look, regardless of what everyone says here, that the scholars ultimately say that the prophets, they do not do fawahish. This is without question. Fawahish are great obscenities and great awful deeds. They don't do this. Absolutely protected from it. Regardless of the finer details of minor sins between the scholars. Dalal here, what does it mean? What does it mean again? Dalal means a sense, no, for prophets, not misguidance. What does it mean? Misdirection, confusion, right? Here he says, عدم الاهتداء إلى الطريق الموصل إلى المكان المقصود. That you don't know what to do. You don't know what's going to happen. أنك كنت في حيرة من حال أهل الشرك من قومك. You see your people worshipping idols. You see them worshipping idols. And you know that worshipping idols is senseless. This is before prophethood. Prophet ﷺ لم يسجد لصنم قط. He never prostrated to a sanam. Right? You know this without a doubt. But then what should you do? He did not know. He would go to Ghar Hira and he would do tahannuth. Tahannuth is fikr and tafakkur. And he would think of Allah's creation. كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يتحنث الليالي ذوات العدد. As the hadith mentioned, this was before the prophethood came to him. He didn't worship idols. But he didn't know what was expected in terms of ibadah. How to worship. What is the sharia that Allah Azza wa Jal wants from me? That's what وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًّا فَهَدَى means here. He didn't have wahi. Right? He didn't have wahi yet. So this dalal here means is he doesn't have the wahi that shows him how to act upon that relationship. So وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًّا فَهَدَى. And then he says وَوَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَى. And then he says وَالْعَائِلْ الَّذِي لَا مَالَ لَهُ وَالْفَقْرُ يُسَمَّى عَيْلَةً. قال تعالى وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ عَيْلَةً فَسَوْفَ يُغْنِيكُمُ اللَّهُ مِنْ فَضْلِهِ. Alright, so what does وَوَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا mean? We call our children عيال, right? There are dependents. عيال, عيلة refers to poverty, right? And he says here that someone who is عائل is someone who is utterly dependent. They don't have wealth to give them independence so that they can operate. So وَوَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَى. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala أغنى نبيه بغنى الوحي, بغنى القلب. That's one. And also بغنى المال. The Prophet ﷺ, our belief is that the Prophet ﷺ was not poor. Pay attention to this. The Prophet ﷺ, there's many hadith that show us that the Prophet ﷺ said that days would pass on end without bread being in the house of Al Muhammad ﷺ. Bread would not be in their home. Was this out of faqr and haja and awaz? Was this out of need? No, this was out of karam. The Prophet ﷺ wasn't a needy person. The Prophet ﷺ would give, and he would give a lot. And in fact, he would take كَانَ يَسْتَدِينَ لِيَتَصَدَّقْ. The Prophet, people would come and ask him for money, and he would say, go to Fulan and tell him that I am getting a loan from him to give you sadaqah. Right? So the Prophet ﷺ wasn't poor. Because there's a difference, right? When someone gives out of from their wealth and their sustenance, he is giving, right? When someone is in a state of need, this is ihtiyaj. He's in need of others. He's dependent upon others. He's not finding his suffice. No, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him, and He gave him so much that He would give everyone around him. So in fact, the Prophet ﷺ would give, and he was the first of the ones who would give. So this is something, but Allah held His Prophet to a higher standard. That's why even his family, the family of the Prophet, they were held to a higher standard. The Prophet ﷺ was not allowed, neither was his family allowed to take from sadaqah. They were not allowed to take from zakah. They were not. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raised them above this. Of course, the Prophet ﷺ lived on the most humble of means, but this was by choice. Some people live by this because they have to. They have no choice. Right? I don't have money. I can't do this and I can't do that. So I have to accept my circumstance. But when someone is in that situation out of choice, because of their generosity, it raises their maqam. So anyway, let's focus on something here. Look at what he says here. He says, وَالْمَقْصُودُ مِنْ هَذَا إِيقَاعُ الْيَقِينِ فِي قُلُوبِ الْمُشْرِكِينَ بأن ما وعده الله به محقق الوقوع قياسا على ما ذكره به من ملازمة لطفه به فيما مضى وهم لا يجهلون ذلك عسى أن يقلعوا عن العناد ويسرعوا إلى الإيمان وإلا فإن ذلك مساءة تبقى في نفوسهم وأشباح. So he goes on to mention other things. So he says here, look at this. He says that why does Allah mention these three things? أَلَمْ يَجِدْكَ يَتِيمًا. He found you an orphan. What did Allah do for His Prophet when he was an orphan? You know, when you're talking about Quraysh, you're talking about a very tribal society. This tribal society, it's not easy to get ahead in life as an orphan in this tribal society. The waqi' should have been that he was muhammash. That's what the waqi' should have been. Because in a tribal society, the person would find his strength in his tribe, in his father, in his inheritance from his father. But the Prophet ﷺ did not have a father to lean on. He did not have this, to give him that special station among Quraysh. Right? So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected him, preserved him, gave him a special status in the eyes of these people, it was because He was preparing him for the mission. He was a Sadiq al-Amin for a reason. Right? So take a look at this. Take a look at this. The Prophet ﷺ was accepted by Quraysh with these two characteristics. Sadiq, trustworthy, he's truthful and he's trustworthy. They embraced him so that when he comes with the message, Allah is giving them a reminder. He came to you as a Sadiq al-Amin, and now you're coming to say he's a liar. You're coming to say that he's a madman. You're coming to say that he's a sahir, that he's a magician. No, you know, jarrabtumuh. You tried the Prophet for 40 years of life until the message came to him. أَلَمْ يَجِدْكَ يَتِيمًا فَآوَى. Allah is the one who gave you shelter. Take a look at this, brothers and sisters. There is wisdom and hikmah ilahiyah in the tadbir. Allah didn't want the strength of Muhammad to be coming because of the strength of his family and the strength of his father. Because what? If it was from the strength of his father, people would have said he was afforded a special status because his father built for him something great. He's in the footsteps of his father. La, Allah wanted to build it. Allahu alladhi awah. Even when it came to Abu Talib, so forget, Abdul Muttalib was someone who was esteemed in the eyes of Quraysh. He died when the Prophet was young, very young. Then Abu Talib stayed with the Prophet ﷺ. He was also respected among Quraysh. Abu Talib was the one whom the Prophet ﷺ got the protection from, socially. He protected him from all of their attempts to attack him and hurt him. But even he, Allah wanted him out of the picture before the big transition. Am al-Huzn came, Abu Talib died. Am al-Huzn came, Khadija died. Khadija was وَوَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَى. They say, he mentions here, أَغْنَاهُ اللَّهُ بِالْوَحِي وَأَغْنَاهُ اللَّهُ بِمَالِ خَدِيجَةَ. Allah supported him emotionally and financially through his wife Khadija. But then she was also out of the picture. Why? So that it could be known that this risala, Allah Azza wa Jal, هو الذي سيتم هذا الأمر. Allah is the one who will get this message where it needs to go. Not Abu Talib because of his status, and not Khadija because of her wealth and support. No, Allah is going to support His Prophet. وَوَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَى. This is a message to the mushrikeen. I'll repeat this, I'll highlight it. Why does Allah mention these things? Orphan, being an orphan, and then He mentions the message. وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًّا فَهَدَى. You didn't have wahi, now you have wahi. And then He mentions dependence. عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَى. Why does He mention these three things? This is to tell the mushrikeen, hey look, you've lived with him for a lifetime already, and you see what Allah has prepared for him and facilitated. This is a warning, pay attention, that Allah is going to continue to take care of His Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, if you know what's better for you, pay attention to how Allah is taking care of him and listen to the message. This is better for you. This is a message. And you see, Surat ad-Duha is very deep. There's a lot of meaning in it. What does the rest of the surah say? After that, فَأَمَّا الْيَتِيمَ فَلَا تَقْهَرْ وَأَمَّا السَّائِلَ فَلَا تَنْهَرْ وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ. Allah mentions that the Prophet ﷺ was granted grand and great ni'am. And then He says, interestingly, these three blessings were mentioned after those three trials. Right? These three blessings were mentioned after those three trials. The trial of faqr and poverty, haja, وَوَجَدَكَ عَيْلًا فَأَغْنَى. The trial of not knowing guidance and not having wahi and then being given it. And then the trial of being an orphan and not having social support. Right? He was given three ni'am after that. Again, I just want to emphasize this point here. Allah strategizes for His prophets. Why? To take care of the message. You know, there is a prophet who didn't have social credit among his people, and he struggled immensely with them, and the Qur'an tells us about his story. Do you guys know who he is? Not Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam. No, not Shu'aib. I'll say part of the verse. لو أن لي بكم قوة أو آوي إلى ركن شديد. Lut alayhi salam. Sayyidina Lut alayhi salam, the Prophet ﷺ said something about him. He said, رحم الله أخي لوط أخي لوطا لقد كان يأوي إلى ركن شديد فما بعث الله بعده نبيا إلا كان في منعة من قومه. Prophet ﷺ said, may Allah have mercy upon Lut alayhi salam. He was indeed leaning on a very strong pillar. This was Allah. Allah, it was His only support. He didn't have family support. He didn't have social credit. Allah never sent a prophet after him except that he was strategically placed among his people. The Prophet ﷺ was strategically placed among his people. Allah prepared. You see, this is the story of Allah preparing for His prophet. Allah prepares for the believers. You know, this is something that's a reality. Any person in trial needs to understand this. كما أن الله عز وجل دبر أمر نبيه صلى الله عليه وسلم أمر نبيه صلى الله عليه وسلم دبر أمر المؤمنين دبر أمر الخلائق. Allah is the one who prepares everyone's affairs. Nothing is random. Nothing is void of purpose. Why is this happening? Where is it going? There's a clear reason. So this is what Surat ad-Duha tells us. Just as you've went through tough situations, know that there are certain ni'am that are to face those. And how should you be now after you have these ni'am? So what does he say? He says that وَقَدْ قُوبِلَتِ النِّعَمِ الثَّلَاثِ المتفرع عليها هذا التفصيل بثلاثة أعمال تقابلها. So here there's three actions. One of them is فَأَمَّا الْيَتِيمِ فَلَا تَقْهَرْ. As for the orphan, don't suppress the orphan. Allah is, of course, He's teaching us. The Prophet ﷺ already knew. He's teaching us through the Prophet. If you're someone who went through a trial, shouldn't it teach you something? If you're someone who knows what it means to go through certain trials, and then you see someone else in that trial, what should that mean for you? Right? So the Prophet was a yatim, and then Allah gave him shelter. Now he's being told, as for the yatim and the orphan, make sure you don't suppress and oppress the orphan. You don't suppress and you don't oppress the orphan. وَأَمَّا السَّائِلِ فَلَا تَنْهَرْ. Just as one time you didn't have, right? You didn't have the guidance of wahi. You didn't have the guidance of wahi. وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَمُنُّ عَلَى مَنْ يَشَاءُ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about the Qur'an, ما كنت تدري ما الإيمان ما كنت تدري ما الكتاب ولا الإيمان ولكن جعلناه نورا نهدي به من نشاء من عبادنا. Allah says this to His Prophet. You didn't know the book. You didn't know Iman. That's the sense of وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًّا. You didn't have this guidance. So He says here, وَأَمَّا السَّائِلِ فَلَا تَنْهَرْ. When someone comes asking, what is that? The sa'il is someone who is confused, someone who needs guidance, someone who doesn't know what to do, someone who needs help in figuring out what to do. You know what it means to be in that situation. وَأَمَّا السَّائِلِ فَلَا تَنْهَرْ وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ. This is muqabil. So وَأَمَّا السَّائِلَ فَلَا تَنْهَرْ is muqabil وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًّا فَهَدَى. وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ is وَوَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَى. This is in response to that. Allah gave you ghina and He gave you richness. Now what do you do? What do you do with that? He says, وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ. As for the blessings of your Lord, بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ, not بِنِعْمَةِ إِلَهِكَ, not بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ. Allah is the one who gave you every ni'mah that you have in every stage of your life, from the beginning all the way to the end. That's Allah for you. فَحَدِّثْ. What does that mean? What does that mean? There's tafsil here. Some people, they think that means you should speak of your blessings. You should go announce them to the world. What does وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ mean? It means أَدِّ شُكْرَهَا. What does that mean? What does it mean to speak of the blessings that Allah has given you? It is to use it in a way that is pleasing to Allah. That's what وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ means. It is give the gratitude of the ni'mah. That's what you need to do. وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ يعني أَدِّ شُكْرَهَا. Give the shukr and the gratitude for the blessings, and that's to use it in a way that's pleasing to Allah. There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where he says, استعينوا على إنجاح الحوائج بالكتمان فإن كل ذي نعمة محسود. The Prophet ﷺ says, you shouldn't speak of your blessings. Some people, they use this ayah and say, what? Say what? That means I need to tell the whole world about every blessing I have. Is that what the Prophet, what we're being told here? No. Prophet ﷺ tells us in the hadith, conceal your blessings. Protect your blessings. استعينوا على إنجاح الحوائج. What does that mean? Seek the fulfillment of your blessings, or of your needs, I should say. Seek the fulfillment of your needs by concealing them. على إنجاح الحوائج بالكتمان, by concealing them. فإن كل ذي نعمة محسود. Everyone who has a blessing will ultimately be envied for that blessing. So وأما بنعمة ربك فحدث is actually telling us to be grateful for the ni'am. You see how we started in trial and we ended in shukr? So this surah teaches us how to have perspective on things. Right? They start off with trial. Right? مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَلَى. And the end of the surah, it's giving perspective on shukr. And this gives us the good transition to the next surah, which is Surat ash-Sharh. Surat ash-Sharh. Surat ash-Sharh actually builds on the same meaning. Surat ash-Sharh builds on the same, and that's why these two surahs go hand in hand. They go with each other. They're two strongly connected surahs. So now we get the meaning behind Surat ad-Duha. It's a surah that teaches us about trials and what it should do to us and how we should realize the bigger picture of trials, the bigger picture. Then in Surat ash-Sharh, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala builds on this. It's called a few things. Surat Alam Nashrah. It's also called Surat al-Inshirah. There's different names for the surah, but they're all valid. It's the 12th surah that was revealed. In Tartib al-Nuzul, they say, وَقَدْ عُدَّتِ الثَّانِيَ عَشْرَةِ في عداد نزول السور نزلت بعد سورة الضحى بالاتفاق وقبل سورة العصر. So it came down between Surah al-Duha and Surah al-Asr. Right? It's the 12th surah revealed to the Prophet ﷺ. It starts off with questions. What does it say? أَلَمْ نَشْرَحْ لَكَ صَدْرَكَ? Did we not relieve your heart for you? أَلَمْ نَشْرَحْ لَكَ صَدْرَكَ? وَوَضَعْنَا عَنْكَ وِزْرَكَ? And remove for you your burden. الَّذِي أَنْقَضَ ظَهْرَكَ? That weighed you so heavily on your back, and raised your reputation high. وَرَفَعْنَا لَكَ ذِكْرَكَ. These are questions. Why does Allah start with these questions? He says here, these questions are what we call istifham taqriri. Allah is affirming something that His Prophet already knows. His Prophet already knows these things, and He's asking him these questions. Why? He says, the purpose of this is لأجل أن يراعي هذه المنة عندما يخالجه ضيق الصدر مما يلقاه من أذى قوم يريد صلاحهم وإنقاذهم من النار ورفع شأنهم بين الأمم ليدوم على دعوته العظيمة نشيطا غير ذي أسف ولا كمد. Why does Allah ask His Prophet these questions? You know, there's a verse in the Quran that says this: وَكُلًّا نَقُصُّ عَلَيْكَ مِنْ أَنْبَاءِ الرُّسُلِ مَا نُثَبِّتُ بِهِ فُؤَادَكَ. We're telling you these stories for what purpose? To make you strong, to strengthen your resolve. Did the Prophet need that? Yeah, he needed it. The Prophet ﷺ needed the Quran to strengthen his resolve, and that's what Allah says. لِنُثَبِّتَ بِهِ فُؤَادَكَ, so that we may make your heart firm. That's why Allah gave him the stories of the past. And this is the sifa bashariyah, the human characteristic in the Prophet. If the Prophet ﷺ did not get affected emotionally by things, he wouldn't have been human. Every human being is going to get affected emotionally by things. Being affected emotionally by something doesn't make you a bad person. You know, what does Allah say about His Prophet in other verses? لَعَلَّكَ بَاخِعٌ نَفْسَكَ أَلَّا يَكُونُوا مُؤْمِنِينَ. Perhaps, O Muhammad ﷺ, you will kill yourself and مُهْلِكٌ نَفْسَكَ, because they don't believe. Because you don't believe. وَلَقَدْ نَعْلَمُ أَنَّكَ يَضِيقُ صَدْرُكَ بِمَا يَقُولُونَ. We know that your chest becomes tight for what they're saying, right? So when we say this about the Prophet ﷺ, it's not manqasa. It doesn't bring deficiency to the Prophet, because the Prophet ﷺ له الكمال البشري. This is kamal nisbi. This is human perfection. Right? This is different than Allah's perfection, because Allah's perfection is absolute perfection, kamal mutlaq. But for someone to think, if this applies to the Prophet, does it apply to me? Of course it does. Of course it does. You know, someone's going to say some word to you. Is it going to hurt you? Is that bad that it hurts you? No, it's not. It's not bad that it hurts you. Someone does something that brings you down and makes you feel sad. Are you weak because you feel sad? Some people think that. You know, if I feel weak, that means if I feel sad, that means I'm weak. No. Sadness is not a weakness. No, trying to bury your sadness. We have Dr. Saima with us. She could tell us better, inshallah, very soon. Trying to bury your sadness is actually what's weak. Some people, I'm going to bury all the wounds, right? I'm bulletproof, right? I'm not going to show any emotion. Khalas, that's it. No, nothing affects me. I don't need advice. I don't get affected by people. People don't hurt me. Nah. Now, who are you? You're better than the Prophet ﷺ, yani? You're not hurt by people? They don't bring you down? What is it? The Quran says this about the Prophet ﷺ. وَلَقَدْ نَعْلَمُ أَنَّكَ يَضِيقُ صَدْرُكَ. We know your chest becomes tight because of what they're saying. Being sad is human. Being angry is also human. Right? But what do you do with that sadness? This is the question. This is the question. So these are questions that Allah is asking His Prophet why, right? So this is like, this is like you're giving, you see someone down and you come to him and say, don't you remember that you went through a tough situation and Allah helped you before? Don't you see how in the past you had very little knowledge and you're continuing to grow in knowledge? Don't you see that as time passes, you're becoming more patient? When you say this to someone, what are you doing? You're bringing them up. You're bringing them up. And this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doing this for His Prophet. This is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala affirming for His Prophet. This is like, He's asking him these questions. Why? He knows, the Prophet knows this, but this is reminding him of it to give him emotional support. This is Allah giving His Prophet emotional support to deal with the adha of the mushrikeen, the adha that he had to deal with and the discomforts and that he had to deal with. So if you want to see an example in the Qur'an of Allah giving His Prophet emotional support, this is the beginning of Surat ash-Sharh, is a clear example. It gives you a methodology, right? Some people, this is Allah's teaching us through this. Look through both of these surahs. You know what? Both of these surahs teach us something. Maybe we'll talk about this more in the khutbah. They teach us positive thinking, at-tafkir al-ijabi. When you're in trials, you need to think positively. If you don't think positively, then your bala is going to lead you to depression. And that's, for many people, it's like that. The negative thinking is what made them fall into such a bad place in their relationship with Allah Azza wa Jal. So these two surahs, what are they? They're overwhelmingly positive. It's telling about the Prophet ﷺ, about the past. وَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَى أَلَمْ يَجِدْكَ يَتِيمًا فَآوَى. Look at this, everything. With every negative thing you've experienced, you'll find 10 things that are positive to face off against it. And this is what Surat ash-Sharh teaches us. Right? أَلَمْ نَشْرَحْ لَكَ صَدْرَكَ وَوَضَعْنَا عَنْكَ وِزْرَكَ الَّذِي أَنْقَضَ ظَهْرَكَ وَرَفَعْنَا لَكَ ذِكْرَكَ. All of these questions are for this purpose after that. What does sharh mean? What does sharh mean? Here look, he tells us linguistically. He says, وَالشَّرْحُ حَقِيقَتُهُ فصل أجزاء اللحم بعضها عن بعض ومنه الشريحة للقطع من اللحم والتشريح في الطب ويطلق على انفعال النفس بالرضا بالحال المتلبس بها. So here he says, look, if you want to know what sharh means, there's a literal meaning for it and there is a metaphorical meaning for it. The metaphorical meaning is رفع الضيق. He says, is to remove. He says, أصله استعارة ناشئة عن إطلاق لفظ الضيق. Alright, here you're talking about a sense of constraint on your chest within, then you find sharh. It becomes spacious, right? But what does it mean originally? It's talking about sharh al-lahm. That's you cutting the meat from the bone and you're separating the meat into pieces. This is what we call sharh. And then he said tashrih. What does it mean to do tashrih? It means to, what do you call it? To dissect and to open up. Like they do in, what do they call that for a human being? When they take the body to the morgue, they, what is it? Autopsy, there you go. They do an autopsy on the body, right? They open it up and they examine it. So tashrih for the jasad is to dissect it and open it up, right? So that's what it means technically, linguistically. Now, when it means metaphorically, is to remove the tightness. It's as though dhiq becomes something, it manifests in something physical, and it does. It does, like people who, it starts off as anxiety, right? The emotional, and then when the person gets an anxiety attack, it starts becoming something physical. They start feeling like they're having a heart attack, right? The tightness in their chest, right? Certain feelings in their face and in their arm, and it's like they're having a heart attack, right? So that's how anxiety works. That's how anxiety works. It starts off emotionally, and then it becomes something very physical. Same thing with the opposite. When you feel very, very stressed, and then you recite the Qur'an, and it alleviates all of that stress. What happens, right? All of those humum, you feel as though your chest is opened up. When Ramadan comes, right? So again, because it's like a burden, right? Dhunub, humum, struggles of life, they're like burdens on our shoulders. What happens when Ramadan comes and we're between Siyam and Qiyam and very little chance to sin? What happens? You feel very light. You feel as though you can operate on just a few hours of sleep, and you feel very excited and jubilant and this, and why? From what? This is from the athar of انشراح الصدر من أثر العبادة. This is the chest opening up spiritually because of the effects of ibadah. No, so he says after this, what are these things? The Prophet ﷺ. So is there a literal sense for this? Is there a literal sense for this? So ash-Sharh, what is it meant for the Prophet? Literally or metaphorically? What do you think? Metaphorically or literally? Both? You know, do you guys know in the seerah that where it's mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ experienced something very special twice in his life? That the angels came and they opened, and of course someone who doesn't believe in the unseen and Allah's qudrah would have difficulty believing this. But what happens? Before, when he was young, as a boy, right, there's the story of Shaqq al-Sadr. You guys heard of it before? How many of you have heard of this before? Well, the opening of the chest of the Prophet. And the angels did something, they cleansed his soul. Right? What did they do? What does it exactly mean? Allahu alam, this is min ilm al-ghayb. We're only told certain parts of it. Of course, when we're talking about the qalb, the heart, we're not talking about this heart, right? We're not talking about this heart. Like when we're talking about the heart goes black, is it this heart here? No, if you go, and we have some doctors with us, they go do examinations on your heart, they're not going to see a black heart, yani. But what are we talking about? The conscience. So what does it mean for the Prophet ﷺ when they opened his chest? Allahu a'lam, min ilm al-ghayb. They did something, they took something out, and they said that this is حظ الشيطان. This is the shaitan's portion from the son of Adam. They took this out from the Prophet ﷺ. That the shaitan has no hadh whatsoever, no outlet, no portion from the Prophet ﷺ at all. And then it happened again. When was the second time it happened? You guys know? When was the second time it happened? Huh? There you go. Isra wal Mi'raj. It happened right before Isra wal Mi'raj, and it's as though the Prophet ﷺ was prepared. You know, because can anyone see Allah in this dunya? They say, most scholars say even the Prophet ﷺ did not see Allah in this dunya. Some of them say he did, but most say he did not. Can we see angels literally in this dunya? No, we cannot. Even the Prophet ﷺ, he only saw Jibreel alayhi salam in his original form, they say 2 times, or some of them say 3 times throughout his whole lifetime. Right? Can we have those types of experiences? No. So it's as though Allah prepared the Prophet for Isra wal Mi'raj by this second opening of the chest. So he could experience something, because we believe, our belief was Isra wal Mi'raj a dream? The night journey, was it a dream? No, it wasn't a dream. It was with ruh wal jasad. It was with the body and the soul. He did something that no other human being could do. In fact, Jibreel alayhi salam said, when he reached Sidrat al-Muntaha, the high station, he said, this is a station I can't go beyond. لو تقدمت لاحترقت. Even Jibreel, he said, I can't go any forward. If I do, I will burn. Right? So Allah prepared His Prophet in a way that He knows best. So this is what Sharh means. So when you remember Sharh, what does it mean for the Prophet? Both. Physically and metaphorically. What does it mean for us? Of course, metaphorically. Right? رفع الضيق عن الصدر. So he says, look, وَوَضَعْنَا عَنْكَ وِزْرَكَ وَلَيَحْمِلُنَّ أَثْقَالَهُمْ وَأَثْقَالًا مَعَ أَثْقَالِهِمْ وَلَيُسْأَلُنَّ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. They're going to be asked on the Day of Judgment. They will carry their burdens, and burdens upon their burdens. Well, that sin is like a burden. The person who walks around in this dunya with sin on his back is someone who has the weight of the world on his shoulders. The moment the person removes sin from their life, they'll find that most of the weight and the problems on their shoulders will be gone. وَوَضَعْنَا عَنْكَ وِزْرَكَ. And removed from you all your burdens. Wizrak is the burdens that weighed so heavily on your back. what is this referring to for the Prophet? The Prophet ﷺ, can he do sin? Like we said, that Allah forgive him, مَا تَقَدَّمَ مِنْ ذَنْبِكَ وَمَا تَأَخَّرَ, it's been forgiven. And besides this, even those burdens of dunya and the burdens of the message, all Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alleviated it from the Prophet. وَرَفَعْنَا لَكَ ذِكْرَكَ. What does it mean for the Prophet? وَرَفَعْنَا لَكَ, we've esteemed your mention. That what? When Allah's name is mentioned, the Prophet ﷺ's name is mentioned. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا صلى الله عليه وسلم رسول الله. We've raised your mention up. Then we have the end of the surah. فَإِنَّ, and we're going to actually conclude with that. This took longer than expected, so we'll leave teen to the next time, inshallah. فَإِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا إِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا فَإِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا إِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us profound understanding here. Again, it's all about positive thinking. These two surahs, their central theme is positive thinking. Learning to see through the trial and see the context and see that there's something greater at play. Don't get caught up in the details. Some people, they get so caught up in the details and they miss out on the lessons that Allah wants to teach them. So what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? Indeed with the difficult, I'm going to translate it literally. Indeed with the difficulty is ease. With the difficulty is ease. Ma'a. Ma'a means alongside it. With it. Not after it. With it. Not after it. And look how he says the difficulty is ease. Not the ease. Ease. Yusran. So this is referred to in Arabic as ta'rif and tankir. Ta'rif is definite article. Tankir is indefinite article. Right? Ease, Allah is not limiting its scope. The difficulty, what is this difficulty? It's one. Right? How do I know it's one? It's repeated again. Inna ma'al usri yusra. Inna, indeed, with the difficulty is ease. You know what the scholars, you know what Sayyidina Ibn Abbas teaches us through this? Ibn Abbas, he says, لَنْ يَغْلِبَ عُسْرٌ يُسْرَيْن. One difficulty will not beat two ease, will not beat two forms of ease. Where does he get this from? They have a principle in Arabic language, and he says here, إِنَّ الْمَعْرِفَةِ إِذَا أُعِيدَتْ مَعْرِفَةً فَهِيَ عَيْنُ الْأُولَى وَإِنَّ النَّكِرَةَ إِذَا أُعِيدَتْ نَكِرَةً فَهِيَ غَيْرُ الْأُولَى. This is something we learn from Arabic language. They say that when a definite article is repeated as a definite article, then it's the same one being referred to. Same one, nothing new, right? I bought the horse and then I let my brother ride the horse. Is the second horse different than the first horse? No, everyone's going to know it's the same horse. You're talking about the same horse, right? Right? But if you were to say, I bought a horse and at the same time I also let my brother ride a horse, what are you going to think? Is it one or two? You're going to think it's two. A horse, I didn't specify. It's not the same one. It's not the same one. So that's why they say that this is a principle in Arabic language. And Allah is teaching us through it, hey, you know what? No matter how difficult your life is, trust me, if you look closely, you're going to see so much ease in your life. You're going to see that the ease way outdoes the difficulties. And this is actually the beginning to being able to manage difficulty. So you see, Allah is telling us, hey, you know what? You want to know how to deal with trials? This is what these two surahs are centrally teaching us. You know, trials. So if I was to say, Surat ad-Duha is teaching us that circumstances don't last. No matter how difficult the circumstances, Allah will provide a way out. Surat ad-Duha is teaching us that circumstances don't last. Allah will provide a way out. And then Surat ash-Sharh, on the other hand, is teaching us that the beginning to being able to overcome difficulty is by realizing blessing. Right? By realizing blessing. If you're someone, if you're in a lot of trials, try it. Try it. You know what non-Muslims, they call this? You know what they call it? They call this cognitive behavioral therapy. Right? If you find yourself in a dark place, you know what you need to do? You need to stop thinking about dark things, bad things. Instead, the first thing you need to do is to see how all those dark things could be in a positive way, right? One of your family members just died in a very, very brutal way. Car accident or مثلا a terminal illness or something. Some people, you know what they say when that happens to them? You know what they say when that happens to them? They say, oh, why did Allah do this to me? No, why? There's no way. Some people, this happens. They start denying Allah Azza wa Jal because their loved one died. Allah's not fair. Allah's not fair. If Allah was fair, He would have let my father or my mother live a little longer. I needed them. Why did He do this to me? Why did He take away my son or my daughter? Right? Some people, that's how they think. If you're in a dark place, what are you going to do? Some people, they let themselves sink into the darkness more. وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. Start reminding yourself about their husn khatimah. Perhaps if they had a husn khatimah. Start reminding yourself of the pain that they were relieved from. That's why if they were in illness, then say that Allah Azza wa Jal gave them raha. After the pain of the dunya, what did they go? Mustarih. وَمُسْتَرَاحٌ مِّنْهُ. The positive thinking, right? So the Prophet, we're being told in Surat ash-Sharh, the way out of difficulties is by realizing blessing, and realizing blessing always outdoes the difficulties. In the last two verses, فَإِذَا فَرَغْتَ فَانْصَبْ. The moment you are freed from your duties, strive and worship. وَإِلَىٰ رَبِّكَ فَارْغَبْ. And towards your Lord return. This is an attitude. Again, this is an attitude. An attitude. Does the amal for the mu'min ever stop? You know what? If I allow myself to get caught up in the trials, I'm going to stop doing good things. If I allow myself to get caught up in the details, I'm going to stop doing good things. No, I'm going to keep going. Because Allah's ni'am are so immense, and no matter how bad it is, it's always great. And then beyond this, I'm going to keep doing amal. When you're done, you start again. فَإِذَا فَرَغْتَ فَانْصَبْ. When you are free from all of those things that are distracting you, start again. Refocus with more ibadah after this. وَإِلَىٰ رَبِّكَ فَارْغَبْ. And turn to Allah Azza wa Jal eagerly seeking His reward. These are the two blessings of Surat ad-Duha and Surat ash-Sharh. And next time inshaAllah ta'ala we'll go over Surat al-Teen and Surat al-Alaq inshaAllah. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Subhanakallah wa hamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.